use the chat functionality or the questions functionality off the menu for the webinar. In the GoToWebinar menu, we have everybody muted at default during the webinar because we get a lot of feedback whenever we try to let people speak. So if you do have questions, just please chat them and I'll answer them at the end of the webinar. So as I mentioned, my name is Sean Scanlon. I'm an Executive Vice President here at GSI. All my contact information is on screen if you need to get a hold of me. Definitely feel free to email me, call me with whatever questions, comments that you might have. If you do think of something after the webinar that you didn't get a chance to ask during the webinar, please let me know, and I'll get with you right away on that as well. If for some reason you're having any difficulty seeing the screen right now, what you should be seeing is an introduction slide. So just let me know via chat on the webinar screen. So we're going to be at Quest West. It's coming up next week already. So for those of you that are interested in meeting some of the people from GSI, I personally won't be there at this one. I was just at the Quest Northeast a couple weeks ago, but I will be at Open World. So for those of you that are interested in meeting me, I'll be at Open World this year. At Quest West, our booth is number 207. Come on by and register for our drawing. We're giving away something, and I'm sure it's something wonderful. Anyway, today we're going to talk a little bit about GSI. I won't get into too much detail, keep it short. Talk about the J.D. Edwards roadmap, where things are headed, try to answer the question of why migrate at all, go through some of the upgrade challenges, migration challenges that people have when migrating from World to EnterpriseOne, and then kind of go through what's entailed in a World to EnterpriseOne upgrade in general. Do a customer case study, so a specific customer that we worked with on a World to E1 migration, what were some of the challenges, what made it successful in the end. Talk about a few of the advantages to migrating to EnterpriseOne, and hopefully answer some of your questions at the end. So, quickly about GSI. For those of you that don't know and have never heard of GSI before, we're a Oracle Gold partner focused on J.D. Edwards clients and services. Our headquarters is in Atlanta, but we really are located pretty much everywhere across the United States. We have over 200 years of core J.D. Edwards experience. That's probably more like 300 years at this point. We've done local and global implementations for customers from 50 million all the way up to 10 million plus, with some of them with architectures of over 1,000 users concurrent. We've got over 100 J.D. Edwards technical and functional specialists in our talent pool. Most of them are certified by Oracle. We've got over 21 years relationship with Oracle's J.D. Edwards team. A lot of our guys came from World on the J.D. Edwards team, eventually transitioned to EnterpriseOne. Some of them still do a lot of World upgrades for us from World to World. Our specialties really are around upgrades, existing customer base primarily. We've done tons of upgrades, upgrades from World to World, upgrades to EnterpriseOne, migrations to EnterpriseOne. I think we have something like 40 plus World to EnterpriseOne migrations within our team. And then beyond that, we get into managed services, remote services, all kinds of support services, field consulting, obviously, and remote DBA services. We do a lot on performance optimization, whether that means from the J.D. Edwards side of the house or directly with the database and operating system performance optimization. A lot with disaster recovery and high availability. We have some of the biggest architectures out there when it comes to high availability and disaster recovery. And we have a 100% guarantee on all of our services. So what that means is if we do something and you're not satisfied with the work or the outcome of the work, we'll either come back, fix it for nothing, or you don't have to pay for it at all. So verticals that we're in, I mean, really we're in everything. I'd say lately what we've been focusing on mostly has been real estate industries, wine growers, always manufacturing, and then a lot in the energy industry right now. As far as platforms, we deal with all the platforms. We definitely have a strong AS400 I-Series background because of all of our world experience. But really, we focus a lot on all of the platforms. A lot lately has been on Linux, Oracle, and moving people from one platform to another to Linux, Oracle. As far as the stacks, we work with all the stacks. WebSphere, Oracle Application Server, WebLogic. OAS has not been, that's kind of getting phased out and being replaced by WebLogic, but we still do work with both. As far as virtualization technologies, we primarily work with VMware and OVM, which is Oracle's virtual machines. And then as far as all the interfacing, web services, gateway, business services server, which is the newest one, kind of built on standards for doing interfacing with external web services, XML and BI Publisher, and a lot with portal technologies. We've just been doing tons of portal lately for some reason. So as far as the J.D. Edwards roadmap is concerned, here's kind of what it looks like. As far as J.D. Edwards applications, we have 9.0.2 is out right now. 9.1 supposedly coming, sometime next year. Hasn't been announced. No specific date. The tools 9.1 has been kind of pre-released or is getting ready to be pre-released to certain customers. So, what does that mean to a person that's on World? Well, not necessarily a ton unless you're looking to do a migration to EnterpriseOne, but the real big advantage of this Tools 9.1 that's coming out is all the support for mobile applications, including, Android, iOS, anything mobile, and native support for iPad tablets. And I've seen a lot of the screenshots from what they're doing with it, and it really is pretty amazing. That's going to be part of the Tools 9.1, which isn't even on this slide, but it's coming out prior to the actual application release of 9.1, but it will be backward compatible into 9.0, and I think some of it will be backward compatible into 8.12, but don't quote me on that. World A9.3 has been announced, or at least it's been talked about. They are going to have a 9.3. It's not out and available yet, but they did extend support for A9.2 with Update 2 and EnterpriseOne 9.0 with Update 2 from the 5 years period from when it was actually released. So for those of you that are concerned about support, you get the 5 years from, I think it was like November of last year. So why migrate to EnterpriseOne? And I'm sure a lot of World customers wonder why they would want to. Well, besides kind of the stuff that I talked about a little bit when it comes to features for mobile applications, which, I didn't even add into these slides yet, but is definitely important to a lot of people. There are a lot of other things to think about when you're migrating or thinking about migrating to EnterpriseOne. So number one is performing a migration really right for your organization? And what does that mean? What am I going to get out of it? Am I migrating because it's the future? We think that that's the direction of Oracle, and we want to make sure that we have something that's going to be supported long term. Is it because there's some enhanced functionality that we're going to get out of EnterpriseOne that we really, really want? Obviously, I would suggest that the latter is the better approach, and when you're trying to put together a justification for moving to EnterpriseOne, you really want to focus on business objectives rather than support horizon. Even though I think that support is still important, I don't really see World going away anytime soon. So from the standpoint of, will I be supported on World, I think the answer to that is yes, at least for quite some time. But if there's some business justification and some motivation behind the business itself for moving to EnterpriseOne, then that's when it's right for your organization. As far as interfaces are concerned, when you're looking at migrations, And especially since World is all iSeries, you've got a lot of different options when you move to an EnterpriseOne platform. You know, you can be on Linux Oracle, you can stay on iSeries, you can go to Windows SQL. You have a lot of different options. But you have to really understand what it is that you have currently before you start looking at what you're going to go to. One of the things that we run into a lot is, you know, you have these applications that only run on iSeries. So moving off the iSeries may not be an option for some customers. Then again, a lot of our customers have things that, you know, run on Oracle and run on Windows, and they have World that's being connected to from external databases, and a lot of those start looking at, hey, how do I move off of an iSeries and onto either a Windows or Oracle system? So there's kind of that direction to think about as well. As far as right resources, really, you know, there's a lot of things that are going to change if you're moving from World to EnterpriseOne. You have to think about who's going to support it. You know, am I going to do this thing internally? Am I going to look to outsource the support for the system? It's a little bit more complex from a technology perspective when you look at an EnterpriseOne versus World. We do have a lot of World customers that make the migration to EnterpriseOne, and they have no problem whatsoever with the new technology. But some, you know, they say, well, I'm going to make the move to a new technology and maybe look at outsourcing or hosting this application. Those are things that, you know, you should start evaluating prior to the actual migration. You have to get the executives to buy in on the whole thing too. I mean, if you don't have the business behind you and it's just simply an IT project, it's not going to be that successful because there are a lot of changes. You know, green screen application is very quick, especially for, you know, inputting lots of data. And when you move to a browser-based application, it's probably not going to be quite as quick as the green screen. And that's just simply because the green screen app is just very, very thin, and you're almost accessing it directly. So you have to look at other reasons. You know, if you're heavy data entry, if that's your business and that's what you're using the ERP system for, then it's possible that, you know, it might not be the best option for you to move to EnterpriseOne. But if you're looking at all kinds of other plugins and other capabilities that are only available in EnterpriseOne, then that's definitely something that you should consider. And that kind of gets into the same question about value, right? What am I going to get out of moving to an EnterpriseOne? All those things need to be thought about prior to that, and those are things that we can help you identify, or another business partner can help you identify. Even Oracle, there's tons of information right on Oracle's website now that isn't quite as difficult to find as it used to be. And if anybody's interested in any of that information or has difficulty finding any of that information or would like some links to the information, you know, get with me, send me an email, I'll get that to you right away. As far as budgeting, have you established a budget? Do you know what the budget is? Is it based on, you know, working with a partner to identify what the budget needs to be, or have you just kind of come up with an idea of what you think it should be? You know, training, I think, is one of the areas that especially needs attention when you're moving from World to EnterpriseOne, because there's a lot of differences in EnterpriseOne. There's a lot more capability. There's a lot more flexibility. But it's like going to a restaurant and getting a big menu. You know, sometimes it's great to have a lot of options because you can find exactly what you want, and sometimes it just becomes confusing because there's so many options that you just don't know which one to pick. And I think training can help out with all of that and helping you navigate EnterpriseOne versus World. So I just wanted to kind of show this slide just so that people can kind of get a feel for customers that are moving to the latest releases. And this is going to be, this first slide is on the EnterpriseOne side, and then the next slide will be on the World side. And as you can see, a lot of customers are moving to 8.12 and 9.0 for EnterpriseOne. I don't think anybody now is moving to 8.12, but they were at the beginning of the year. So now, 9.0 definitely taking on a lot of customers, approaching the 50% mark in total customers. And if you combine, 9.0 and 8.12, you get a significant amount of the install base moving to 9.0. In the world side, it hasn't been quite that heavy of adoption. There's still a lot on A7.3. What this doesn't quite show is that there have been a lot of A7.3 customers that have moved out of World and simply decided to go to EnterpriseOne. And one thing to consider as far as deciding which direction you want to go, do I want to upgrade from World to World, or do I want to migrate from World to EnterpriseOne, you need to kind of keep in mind that there's not really a direct path from A9.2 to EnterpriseOne at this point in time. Now, we have done migrations for customers that are on A9.2 to EnterpriseOne. You just have to do things slightly differently. You can't do everything with all the out-of-the-box tools, but it's not overly complicated to move from an A9.2 to an EnterpriseOne 9.02. So don't let that stop you either. At this point, 43% of J.D. Edwards EnterpriseOne customers are working with 9.0. That's a pretty good amount of customers that are on EnterpriseOne. 898.4 had a ton of downloads as far as the latest tools release, and for those, I'm assuming that most customers that are on this call probably don't exactly know what that means. But what a tools release is it's akin to, say, a service pack for Windows, right? It comes with some underlying technology features. It comes with a lot of new updates for the ERP as a whole without affecting individual applications necessarily, meaning it's not going to have, additional break fixes for sales order entry, but it might have some kind of underlying technology feature that fixes some issue with the ERP as a whole that could impact, say, like a sales order type of a thing. And the only reason why I bring that up is because otherwise I just wasn't sure if 600 plus, 898.4 downloads really means anything if you don't have context with it. And as far as world customers, 28% of the world customers are working with A9.1 or A9.2. And I think that there's been a lot slower adoption of the A9.2 just simply because a lot of world customers were kind of still trying to decide, do I want to move to EnterpriseOne? Do I want to move to the newest version of World? Or should I just stay where I am? And I think a lot of world customers have been on the same release for quite some time and have had, really good success with World. So it's hard to make the decision to move to a newer version of World or an EnterpriseOne 9.0 without having all the facts. So why migrate in the first place? Why do customers migrate? To implement new functionality, that's probably the #1 reason, especially if you're on World now. Why do I want to go to an EnterpriseOne 9.0? Well, maybe I want to get some advanced transportation, some advanced warehousing capabilities. Maybe I'm looking at forecasting capabilities. Maybe I'm looking at, plugging in Demontra or Agile or some other EnterpriseOne functionality. A lot lately has been, hey, I want to get access to some of these portal activities or the self-service features. I want to do, employee self-service and have people register for benefits without using paper. I just want to have an online capability for that. So that's a pretty big one for a lot of customers. New functionality, I'd say, is the key component for those customers that are moving from World to EnterpriseOne. Really, that's probably the biggest driver versus doing a World-to-World. Sometimes this kind of comes into play at the same time where it's a hardware, it's coming to end of life or out of support. I mean, if you already have that kind of consideration and you're thinking about making some kind of a change, that's the time to make that same change, simply because, it's much easier if you're making the change onto new hardware than it is if you're using current hardware. When you're using current hardware, you kind of have to balance, the current production functionality with what you're going to do with the new system, and oftentimes that kind of runs into one another. You know, I can't run conversions to the new system while people are in the system. Well, if people are always in the system, then it makes it very difficult to do a migration or to do any type of upgrade. So, you know, at the time that new hardware is coming to end, or old hardware is coming to end of life, and you're looking at new hardware, that's a good time to do that type of migration. Consolidation of systems, we see a lot of this, really. A lot of customers of ours have a blend of J.D. Edwards and maybe other external ERP systems. We see a lot of customers that are going to be, that have maybe a A73, an XE, you know, an 811 thrown in out there, and they're looking at, hey, let's just consolidate on one ERP. Let's make it easier for my internal support organization to support all these things, and let's make it easier when we call into Oracle, because they're not every single time I don't have to say, oh, no, this is the other ERP system that you guys support that we have. So consolidation has been just really big lately, and we've definitely seen a lot of that. Reducing and removing customizations, that's not necessarily as big of a move for world customers. I haven't seen that be as big of a driver, let's just say, for migration, although there are definitely some world customers that have some you know, some pretty big customizations in there that they're looking at EnterpriseOne 9.0 to resolve for them, so it doesn't have to be a customization. Tools utilizing newer technologies, I definitely see that being a driver for a lot of people. And that's because there's a lot of new features in a 9.0.2 that aren't in an A73 or, you know, a previous version of World. Even with World and the web technologies that are in A9.1 and A9.2, it does enhance a lot of features and it does enhance a lot of the capabilities for World, but it doesn't have nearly the rich feature set of an EnterpriseOne 9.0.2. And that's not to say anything negative about World. I mean, we have a lot of customers that really love World, and they're using it perfectly for what they're doing. But when they are looking at EnterpriseOne, those are some of the things that they're looking at. Outsourcing, you know, really World to EnterpriseOne migrations, we see a pretty decent amount of outsourcing of the hardware and or the software administration. A lot of World customers are looking to migrate off of World because of their internal resourcing and you know, future lack of resourcing. You know, a lot of them have people that have been supporting their World technology and their World ERP for many, many years, but they don't really have kind of a backup to that person. So when they're looking at migrating, a lot of times they're looking at outsourcing that, outsourcing the administration of the new system, outsourcing the hardware sometimes. I definitely see a lot of the outsourcing of software, though. And then that kind of ties into the last one, which is the lack of resources available to support the system. One of those customers specifically that I'll talk about in a couple of slides, that was their big thing. When they were looking at migrating, it was, hey, I want to take advantage of, you know, all the new stuff in HR payroll, and I want to take advantage of the employee self-service and all of that. But also, while we're going through this migration, I want to move to a different operating system and database, because the people that I have within my organization are learning, you know, Windows SQL and Linux Oracle, and I don't have anybody new learning an AS400. And because of that, and I've gone and I've done my research and I've looked, and I don't really see a whole lot of availability of those resources. In fact, I see that talent pool kind of shrinking up. So that was one of their big things, was let's move on to a different operating system and database, because this thing has to support my organization for years, not just, you know, for a short period of time. So all those are kind of reasons for migration. Some of the benefits, as I talked about before, multi-platform support. EnterpriseOne plugs and plays with just about everything. You can have your database be Oracle, SQL Server, or AS400. And you can have multiple databases. You could have some of the stuff on one and some on another, although really nobody does that. When I see people separate out databases, it's usually to separate their development environment from production, and in some cases to separate out specific data, like maybe payroll data that they want to have extra security on. But it runs on everything, and you can have a mix of Windows and AS400 or Windows and Linux or whatever you want to do, and it's definitely supported. It's scalable because a lot of the servers that you're using in an EnterpriseOne implementation are going to be Intel-based. They're going to be typically pretty cheap, and the scalability is there because at any single layer, and we have a whole presentation on virtualization and expanding out layers, but at every single layer, the web layer, the batch layer, the logic layer, every single one of those layers, you can just add in another server and cluster it in without much difficulty. The initial piece is going to be the more difficult part, setting up the first cluster, but afterwards, adding in additional servers is really not that difficult. And if you think about Intel machinery specifically, every year you're basically doubling the power for the same price. Sometimes you're doubling the power for less price. So what you have today is easily expandable and easily scalable upward in the future. And that also kind of works the other way too. Let's say, hey, I put in this huge system and I spent a lot of money, and now all of a sudden my organization kind of downsized. Well, are you going to have better luck taking an Intel-based system and reutilizing that somewhere else in your organization? I think you would. So as far as that's concerned, you can use those systems for other things if the organization declines in size. As far as application autonomy, that's kind of what I got into when I talked about moving data to different places, but it also kind of expands out into applications. I can put my different applications where I want to and have access to different applications where I want that access. I don't have to have everybody have access to the same system or set of systems. I can move people around to different systems. And then same thing with the data. You can move that to different database servers. You can move to different database table spaces, whatever you want to do as far as your data is concerned. You have a lot of flexibility there. Some of the challenges with migrations, and this is also, a challenge with really any type of upgrade in general. You really need to have a good idea of what it's going to take to support the target application and a good idea of what it's going to take to develop in your target application. So if I'm migrating from World to EnterpriseOne, it's not going to be the same as working within World. It's a totally different set of support skills, web servers and logic servers and batch servers and all these types of things, whereas in World it's pretty much the AS400, right? So everything is supported on one single box. Now, EnterpriseOne still has the capability of being supported on a single AS400, and everything can run there, but it's a different set of skills because now I'm talking about running WebSphere, and I'm talking about, having different services and logs and things like that that you have to look at. It's not saying that that's, something that you wouldn't be able to handle. I think, most World customers can, if they're technology savvy in general, can pick up EnterpriseOne fairly easily, but it is something that you have to think about before you kind of get into it. And then that also kind of gets into the development. Sometimes our world customers have a single person that kind of administers the AS400 and also does a lot of RPG and coding and things of that nature, and it's a single resource. That's not to say that that couldn't happen in EnterpriseOne, but it's less likely because it's a different skill set for coding within EnterpriseOne. It's actually a very simplistic language or semi-language when you're looking at EnterpriseOne for developing batch reports or applications, and it underlying generates C code, but it is, it is something different, and it's something that you would have to learn. So it's something that you kind of have to overcome if you're looking to do it. The concern of viability of data after the migration, that is a big concern for customers. They want to make sure that the data is still functioning properly, and I still have, I'm still getting the same responses when I do my migration. So there's a lot of testing that needs to take place when I go through the migration. There's a lot of tools that JD Edwards provides to do the migration, and we'll get into that a little bit in a couple of slides. But it's still something that people need to test, and they really need to go through, and they need to make sure that everything is working as it was when they were in World. Complexity of new application. I mean, I kind of touched on that already, right? There's EnterpriseOne is more complicated than World in the sense that there's just more functionality, but it's more to know, right? So I have different, I have different screens, and it's really just the difference of, say, running in DOS and running in Windows. If you do everything in DOS and you've been running in DOS forever, and then you move to Windows, okay, well, now I have a mouse and I have all these other things that I didn't have before. Something that you have to just consider. It just takes a little bit of time. Integration with third-party applications. If you have stuff that runs specifically on iSeries, then it does limit your choices in, where you can go if you're moving to EnterpriseOne. So you might have to stick with an iSeries. The good things are is that, you don't have to go through that whole Unicode conversion, and you don't have to go through any kind of platform change if you don't want to. So a lot of those third-party applications that worked with World on the AS400 will still function with EnterpriseOne, but it's something that you have to look into before you go through the whole process. And then too much data or concerns over data integrity. I mean, a lot of customers, whether they're upgrading EnterpriseOne to a newer release or migrating from World to EnterpriseOne, a lot of them have a lot of data. I mean, that's just the facts. You have years and years of data that you've entered into the system, and, I hear it a lot. I can't get rid of any of this data. I need to keep it forever. I just recently moved my parents out of their house, and they had been in that house for 20 years. So it kind of made me think about this whole, I need to keep all of my data. Anyway, it's one of those things, and I understand, nobody wants to lose access to things, but you don't necessarily have to. I mean, you can run through migrations where you upgrade the older set of data in advance to the actual migration over to EnterpriseOne, and maybe you keep that in like an archive environment or an environment that would hold just that older data, so that people that feel that they may need to go and look at it again, even though it's 20 years old, it has a special place for them. It will still be there, and they can still access it. But I understand. I mean, it's a lot of data, takes a lot of time, and it's a lot more difficult to do the testing when you have a lot of it. So it's something that can take extra time in the migration process. So a lot of the business objections to the migration. Obviously, people these days are dealing with budgets and trying to find the money for it. Some of the business partners out there have been getting creative, including us, with financing and spreading costs of upgrades over multiple years. So, those are things that you can consider. Personnel, it does take a good amount of people to go through a migration, even an upgrade from World to World, because you have to go through and you have to test and you have to make sure that everything's still working the way that it was. And if you're putting in new functionality, then you need to test out that functionality as well. No time for projects. That happens a lot lately, just simply because of all the downsizing and everything, and people are asked to do more with less resources. So putting in this big migration project can sometimes be difficult and challenging. Complexity, we already kind of talked about that. Return on investment, that's why you really need to do an analysis initially about what am I going to get out of this new system that I don't have today, and why is that going to make things better for me and for my organization and save us money in the long run. Risk, anytime you go through any kind of upgrade or any kind of migration, there's some level of risk, although testing and going through the process multiple times can really limit that risk. People still feel that there's some type of risk in just even taking on a migration because they don't always fully understand it and don't know what exactly to expect in terms of costs and budget, and will I go over it, and that kind of thing. Going back, trying to determine why business process decisions were made in the first place. Sometimes that can be challenging because the people that made the decisions aren't there anymore. Especially if you put in the CRP system, 10, 15 years ago. Well, a lot of people made a lot of decisions, and we've been doing things the same ever since, but we're not really sure why those were made and whether they're still applicable. It takes time to kind of go through that. But it can really be beneficial to your organization because it gives you this chance to kind of look at things and look for areas that you can improve processes and make things quicker and make things easier for your end users. Training, we already talked about training. Sarbanes-Oxley issues. For the most part, EnterpriseOne resolves more Sarbanes-Oxley issues than it causes because there's a lot more capabilities in terms of security between the different applications, between accessing data, for putting in segregation of duties and proving that you have segregation of duties. So for the most part, I think any migration to EnterpriseOne would solve more of those problems than it would cause. But hey, if you've already put in this, big level of effort to make sure that you were SOX compliant, now I got to go through and do the migration to EnterpriseOne and kind of redo that. That can be challenging. And it isn't broke, so why fix it? I mean, that's probably the challenge to doing anything at any point in time. If it's already working for you, why do I want to change it out? And those are things that you really need to think about before going through the migration. So some of the big challenges in EnterpriseOne migrations in general, they're both J.D. Edwards, but it's a different application. EnterpriseOne has a different interface. It's all browser-based, or if you're doing development, it's fat client-based, but it's different than what it is in World. It's got different support requirements, and we kind of talked about that already. And third-party applications. There's going to be some that only work with World, although for the most part, I think the reverse is true. You have a lot more that only work with EnterpriseOne. So you actually get a lot more access to more third-party applications by moving to an EnterpriseOne. But it's something that you still have to review. The projects are sometimes difficult to scope, and what I mean by that is that, and here's a perfect example. We talk to a lot of customers that are looking to migrate from World to EnterpriseOne, and one of the big things that comes up is, do you have any customizations, and how many reports do you need to move over to EnterpriseOne? Well, we think we have 100 reports. But when you actually kind of start digging into it, it's like 400 reports. Okay, well, there's a big difference between 100 and 400 when you're talking about, migrating them over. One of the things that we do within GSI is we have a process for migrating people directly from, RPG-based reports to business, the BI publisher-based reports. So we kind of can circumnavigate some of that long-standing process for going through and rewriting everything in the report writer for EnterpriseOne. It does save a lot of time. But still, I mean, if you're moving from what people think are 100 reports to 400 reports, or maybe 1,000 reports, it's a big difference in overall effort. So it's something that we've gone through multiple times, so we look at it very closely now, and we know how to work with customers to really identify what it is that they actually have. But if it's the first time that you've ever done it, you might not necessarily know what you have and what people are really using. So that kind of gets into the next thing too. Customizations, sometimes it kind of goes along with the reports. Some people don't quite understand what's a customized object versus a standard object. So when you're trying to determine, what somebody has there, and you've got, a limited amount of time to kind of review somebody's system before you are giving them an estimate on the overall project, that can be an area that gets overlooked. What is custom and what does need to be custom in EnterpriseOne? So those are some things that you really need to be paying close attention to. Custom RPGs, again, because especially if I'm looking at platform migration, if I have a lot of RPGs, well, I got to come up with some other plan if I move to Windows SQL or I move to a Linux Oracle implementation, because they don't have RPG. So I either have to decide if I need this thing, or if I'm going to come up with some other way of doing, of writing whatever that application or batch process did before. Or do I just stay on the AS400 and I maybe just retrofit my RPG to work with EnterpriseOne? That's something to think about too. The data conversions are complex, and I don't necessarily mean that they're overly complex, but it's not just, I get in there, I run setup, and it changes all my data from World to EnterpriseOne. It's a process. Even when you're upgrading from World to World, there's still a process, right? And it's not that simple. You have to go through and you have to pay attention to what is changing, and there's a lot of tools that actually do the migrations for you and convert your data from a World format to an EnterpriseOne format. So a lot of that process is handled within the tool set, but then there's changes that happen that then I have to go back and retrofit reports, because maybe they were reporting on a table that's expanded significantly and has a whole lot of new indexes on it, and my report that works great in World, not very fast in EnterpriseOne because it's not taking advantage of the indexes. And that's something also. World, as an ERP in general, does not have anything like a primary key in EnterpriseOne. So, yet what you see a lot of times in World to EnterpriseOne migrations is duplicate key field records. So you have to there's some tools that they provide you at Oracle for looking at that data, for looking at what records are duplicate over the key field, and there's different processes for handling those duplicate key field records, whether you use something that's over the key and you add a 1 to a field, or in some cases maybe you just determine that really these are duplicate records. Maybe the only thing that's different is a timestamp, but everything else between the two records is the same, and you just get rid of one. But you do have to do that analysis, and it can take some time. If you're doing a platform migration, so say I want to move from an AS400 to Windows SQL or to Linux Oracle as part of the overall project, that adds additional time and complexity because there is a whole separate process for moving to the new platform that you have to consider. Mainly, it just adds additional time, but if it adds so much time that it can't be done in the period of time that you need it to be done, then you have to look for ways of shortening that time frame, and that's where you get the additional complexity. It's not to say that it's overly difficult, but it's something that you have to think about. So let's go over what happens in the World to EnterpriseOne migration. So in advance to the migration, things that you should do, figure out what training requirements you're going to need in what functional areas, what technical areas, what things are industry specific. If I'm going to bring up some new features within EnterpriseOne that I don't have in World currently, then I have to get obviously some training in that, but there's going to be some differences just in the applications in EnterpriseOne in general. So it's time to start thinking about training. Put together your preliminary work plan. Work with a business partner. Do it internally. Whatever you think is best. There's a lot of information available on My Oracle support now that kind of steps you through the process, or at least gets you to the point where you can find information to get things moving. And that'll help you kind of get a feel for the overall amount of time that it will take. You got to figure out what the level of effort is going to be, and sometimes, if you, most customers, they have not been through this before. Maybe it's possible that you've moved from, an organization that did a World EnterpriseOne migration, and you're new to this company, and you've been through it before. Well, you have a leg up because most people have not been through this, so it's kind of a little bit difficult for them to come up with what is the level of effort that I'm going to have and how many resources do I have. We can help kind of guide in that. Kind of overall, you're going to need somebody, at least one person, kind of driving the technology side. You're going to need, functional leads in each major functional area that are going to kind of drive the testing process. But overall, a migration from World EnterpriseOne has a lot of technical components to it, so you definitely want to make sure that you have that that part understood. Responsibilities kind of gets into the same thing. What are you expecting out of the overall project? Are you just expecting to go from kind of a World to an EnterpriseOne and have the same functionality? You just want to get A to B, but you want to be on EnterpriseOne? Or am I hoping really to implement some new functionality or do something new with the business? Make sure that you understand that before you take on the project. And that kind of also gets into the scope. And identifying risks, that can be sometimes a little bit difficult, but, it all kind of gets back to the same things, right? I need to know what I need for training. It's a risk if I don't get it. I'm not 100% positive about the level of effort. That could be a risk. And then just risks when it comes to the data, risks when it comes to going live. Those are things that you guys want to kind of pay attention to and know what to focus on. And we can definitely help with that, or some other business partner can help with that. I would definitely recommend doing a migration assessment. Go through all of the technologies that you're going to look at on the target architecture. Make sure you understand the minimum technical requirements. Even if you're staying on AS400, there could be, and most likely are going to be, different requirements in terms of technology for the AS400. There might be a different PTF level. There might be different web technologies that you're currently not using that you're going to need to use with EnterpriseOne. So there's going to be some additional requirements regardless. Customizations, am I going to need a custom application that I have right now? And, how is that going to fit into EnterpriseOne? You want to really look at doing all of those things. If you're looking at doing a migration from one platform to another, you have to think about whether your current AS400 can handle certain aspects of the migration, because there are components to a World EnterpriseOne migration that have to run on the I-Series. There's specific applications that only run on the AS400. So a lot of times you need to have a copy of, say, your production data that you currently have in World copied down, and then the ability to run these applications over that copy of data prior to kind of migrating it onto another platform. And the only reason why I bring that up is that that's going to take additional sizing requirements. And we've ran into that at customers before where, they didn't take into account, or we didn't take into account. Actually, we didn't scope that one, so it was a different group that scoped it. But in terms of the overall sizing, it's something that you need to think about, because you need to have a copy of that AS400's data, and you need to be able to expand it using some of these tools that they provide you for the migration. So it will get bigger before it migrates over. So you need to make sure you have space for that. If you have data archiving requirements, we got to start looking at how much data do you really have, how much space do you have, how much time do we think it's going to take to migrate, how much time do you have for the migration. All those things need to kind of be lumped together to determine whether or not you might need to archive prior to doing a migration. And that even would hold true for doing a world-to-world upgrade. If you have too much data, it might take too long, in which case, you need to get rid of some of that, or at least archive it and upgrade it in a separate process. The RPG applications, you really need to know what they are, what you're going to do with them, which ones you need after the fact, and which ones can be migrated to something else. Same thing with third-party applications, and we kind of talked about that, and external interfaces into the system. As far as a technical migration, what does that look like? Really, it's going to start out with installing a 9.0 or 9.02, on the chosen platform. That's basically, just a base install with what they call ESUs and updates and the latest tools release, which is kind of like a service pack thing. That has to be all laid down prior to this whole thing. Purging data, if you're going to do it, it would be somewhere in this process here. And then, as I mentioned, you'd copy your world production environment to the conversion environment. Then they give a couple of, they provide this X3 PTF through Oracle, and that prepares the data for 9.0 migration. And what that basically allows you to do is, this is where you kind of dedupe the key field records, and it does some data dictionary stuff. There's a whole bunch of processes that happen during this X3 PTF, and there's like a whole menu structure, and there's step-by-step process for what you need to do. And it's all within the guide. So if you are interested in that information, I can dig that up and provide it. Just feel free to send me an email or something. Then you're going to do the world to E1 data copy on the AS400. And if you're going to do a migration, this is where it would occur after that process. So there's a couple of things that happen to make that data be E1 capable, and then prior to migrating, and that has to happen prior to migrating to another platform if you're going to migrate to another platform. Then this is the process where you would kind of come in and you'd use EnterpriseOne to move the data, the EnterpriseOne middleware, to move the data from AS400 to, say, SQL Server or Oracle database. And then once you got over there, there'd be some 9.0 upgrade conversion. So really, kind of the world to E1 data migration process, the initial piece kind of moves it into like almost a quasi-XE format. All the tables become kind of an XE format. And then you go and essentially run an upgrade that moves it into a 9.0 format. So that would happen last. Kind of the overview of a migration. You'd want to review your current state, understand, what you've got, optimize your business processes. If I'm going to make any kind of changes, if I'm going to, look at, doing some business enhancements, or maybe taking advantage of some things that exist in EnterpriseOne that didn't exist before. If you have fasters and world writers, this is the time to retrofit them kind of right after this whole process. Same with custom modifications and interfaces. Script preparation, what that's basically about is, EnterpriseOne is going to be different than World, and maybe you had some great test scripts for World, but they don't necessarily apply, or they won't apply 100% to EnterpriseOne. You'll have to make some changes, especially if you are changing your processes or procedures. Security and menu redesign. EnterpriseOne has a lot more security options, and part of that is the segregations of duties. Part of that is this menu redesign and keeping people away from certain menus. But applications within EnterpriseOne call other applications, and a lot of times you need to secure people from being able to do that. And And then you'll get into kind of your applications testing. During the applications testing, you're running your integrity reports, making sure that, your financial information in World ties to the financial information in EnterpriseOne. You might want to do this multiple times, because maybe the first time you realize some stuff didn't quite come through, or maybe in the testing process you are kind of doing a unit test where you're a siloed approach, and then you want to integrate all the applications together and kind of do a day in the life sort of test. People have additional conversions during that time. Not only that, but you want to run through the conversions more than once, just because the first couple of times there's usually some things that you find that, either, hey, I need to get this thing shortened down in time, or I found some data that didn't quite come over right. Whatever. You'll have to probably do additional conversions and run through it a few times. And then validation and tuning, out of the box, EnterpriseOne is kind of generically tuned for, a certain number of users, but you may have specific tuning requirements, and most likely will have specific tuning requirements for your own organization in order for the system to run optimally. And then your go-live process. So I'll try to be quick on this customer case study because I know we're running out of time. In this case, we had a customer. They wanted to be on the web-based platform. They had internal skills around Windows and SQL. As I mentioned before, they wanted additional functionality for HR, benefits, all that kind of stuff. They wanted to get better support from Oracle. They felt that they didn't really have a whole lot of support on the World side, and they wanted to get some better support by moving to EnterpriseOne. They had a lot of new software features and functionality that they wanted, and they also were planning on plugging in Agile and Demantra and some other third-party applications, and EnterpriseOne allowed for that. So our approach was to design a new architecture, perform the initial install of the new system, run table conversions throughout the life of the upgrade, lead the application testing and implementation effort. We performed all the retrofits. It wasn't like we just did them all on our own and without any input. We definitely worked with the customer in order to determine what those retrofits were. But we did all of the retrofitting into the new system, and then assisted with a mock go-live task, which is essentially like kind of a fake go-live where we go through the whole process and prove it out. Stress testing, making sure that we can add enough users into the system to symbolize the amount that they would have in a real go-live effort, and then did the go-live tasks, and then provided support after the fact for production. So the outcome was that the project was on time and under budget. In this case, we developed a process to transition the world writers and RPGs directly to BIPub, so saved them some time. Because we kept doing repetitive testing, the go-live was really easy, and the customer said as much. They were very happy with the go-live. It was a big no-nothing. In the customer's own opinion, 75% of the users liked the look and feel better, which I guess means 25% either didn't care or didn't like it as much, and I can understand that. They also moved to a more easily scalable and supportable Windows architecture, and that was what they had determined that they wanted to do for their organization going forward. The challenges really were that they had a platform migration plus the conversion times required for the data, required them to have data archiving, so we had to do data archiving in order to get through everything. Testing requirements and day-to-day operations, I mean, really, you could say that would happen on any migration or any upgrade, because no matter what, your resources have a real regular day job, and this is kind of one more thing that they have to do, and it is difficult to balance those requirements, especially if all of a sudden there's an emergency in the production system. And this is kind of where I got into the other thing, too. In this case, some of the reports that were required by the business were initially missed in the scoping. And we kind of had to go back and revisit that and realize that there were some things that hadn't quite, that needed some additional focus. And then the customer just kind of, I mean, there's really no good way for a customer to know in advance what the level of complexity is going to be in order to support the system until they actually get the system there. I mean, I don't really know how to show a customer what the level of complexity is going to be until they actually see it and use it. So I think that there was a little bit of a lack of understanding there, but that's understandable. Some of the success factors. We ran multiple conversions. We had a detailed cutover plan, and we ran, we had the full mock go live, so everybody knew what was going on. Stress testing, we really did it. We went in, made sure that we had a simulation of what their real user load was going to look like, and because of that, we were able to resolve a couple other issues, some locking and some things like that. A third-party readiness assessment, and a lot of people would say, well, why would you want somebody else coming in there and assessing your work? At GSI, we really believe that this is a real requirement. We don't know everything, and it's the third party's job to kind of come in there and say you didn't do it right, so they usually find some stuff. And I think it's really actually beneficial to us and to the customer for that to happen, because we learned something and they learned something, and typically it just makes the system better before going live. You want to have a run book with the exact steps for your go live. You need to know exactly what you need to do, all the sequels you need to run, all the conversions that need to run, the amount of time that they run in. It's really, really important. The business has to really be behind it, especially at the very top, because there's always going to be some dissension, and they have to make sure that is, that the company as a whole understands that this is the direction that they're going to take and there's no going back. Which kind of gets into the next thing, that you need to have the business lead the project and not IT lead the project. Because if it gets into, hey, we're just doing this for technology, most of the business isn't going to care. The resources have to be committed. I understand that, people have to do other things, but if you're not going to go in and do your testing, and you're not going to go in and make sure that the data's there, and you go live, well, there's a good chance it's not going to work. So you really want to make sure that you have people in there testing and at least being, committed to what they said they could commit to. You really want to stay with the plan. Don't allow additional things to kind of creep in there. It's just like building a house, right? There's a whole lot of options that you can add in as you go along. But the more that you add in, the more that it's going to cost, and the more time it's going to take to get it done. So try not to add in a whole lot of additional features. And you want to enforce communication through weekly meetings and status reports. I mean, this is really important. The more that people know and the more that people are given feedback throughout the process, the happier they're going to be, and the more that they're going to contribute to the overall outcome. And keep it as simple as possible. You want to put in new functions and new features. That's a good thing. Just don't go overboard with it in the first round of the project. Maybe have a second phase for additional features and functionality. I think I'll probably just skip most of the migration advantages. If you guys want, I can send you this stuff. It has like end user efficiencies that have been improved with the copy and paste functionality in and out of Excel to the grid. That's really cool. There's dashboards, plant manager dashboard, financial dashboard. You can just kind of drill down into things. You can drill down into graphs. You can see exactly who's late paying and how often they've been late paying. And, if I put out some kind of, special feature, did it increase my sales, all that kind of stuff. They're in the different dashboards. Security and compliance. You've got forced immediate password change on login. You've got the capability for enhanced password policies, so special characters, minimum number of characters. Address book security, which is really nice. You can hide tax ID, address, phone number, date of birth, gender, all that kind of stuff can be hidden in EnterpriseOne now. It didn't used to be natively supported. You had to write customizations. Support for LDAPs like Active Directory is built in to EnterpriseOne. so you can have like single sign-on for users. UV data selection and application query security. You can block out, if I'm running a query and I'm doing finds, I can block data from being seen by both reports and by the data browser. BI Publisher, we kind of talked about that in more of a general sense, but BI Publisher is kind of like the report writer for EnterpriseOne. It's really very nice. It allows you to do like exports or direct reports to Excel and to PDF and to all kinds of other things, and email them out, all that kind of stuff. It's really great. So, in summary, we talked about GSI. We went over the roadmap, talked about upgrading and migrating and why doing it, some of the challenges behind it, what's involved in World E1 migrations, went through a customer case study, talked about some of the success factors and the advantages. Some last minute stuff on 898.4. Actually, I should say 898.4, not 894. The data privacy for address book, that's in there. There's log file monitoring, which basically allows you to, monitor for certain things that show up in the logs and send emails about it. You can put links to URLs right in application forms, and some of the really cool stuff on the mobile application. Just like on if you have like an Android phone or an iOS phone, and you can click on a phone number and stuff like that, and it pulls up the number and allows you to dial it. On the iPad, it allows you to like click on an address that's in, if you're in sales and you click on an address, it'll pull it up, link it into like Google Maps or whatever, and on the phones, you can click on the phone number and dial it right from your phone. It's really pretty cool stuff. Right-click access to row and form exits just right on the middle of the screen. That might not mean that much to you now, but it is a pretty cool feature. Data masking, so I can hide specific data. It's not just address book data, but I can data mask all different types of data. And if you're using Oracle Web Center Suite, they have single sign-on for that. So questions from people. If you have any questions, I did get one question here, and that question is, have you done consolidation of multiple instances where a world database is combined with an EnterpriseOne Oracle database, and were there challenges? And I'm not 100% positive what that's asking, but I think what the question is asking is if I've had World running on AS400 at an organization, and they also have some variation of EnterpriseOne running on an Oracle database, and they want to do some kind of combination of the two in the target. If I'm not correct with that, then feel free to follow up with me later. But yes, in fact, we're going through a migration like that right now with a customer that has one of their components is they have World, and they have multiple EnterpriseOne versions. One of them, at least one of them, is on Oracle. I think they have a few. There's a lot of things that you have to consider. I mean, you've got next numbers considerations and data dictionary considerations. I'm assuming that the end goal in this question is that I would have one instance running on probably an Oracle database, but there's a lot of challenges in that. What we typically try to do is get customers to migrate over to a single instance level, and in most of the cases what we have is a customer that has nothing on 9.0 to start with, and part of the process is I want to move to 9.0 and I want to migrate my other instances to a 9.0 and kind of combine them all at the end. And we've had kind of a couple of different techniques, and it really just depends upon the size and complexity of the organization, but sometimes what we'll do is we'll move everything to EnterpriseOne 9.0 and then start consolidating instances after the fact. And sometimes, depending upon the size and complexity, we may be able to merge them as part of one process. But it's something that we'd really have to look at on a case-by-case basis to see what was the best approach. I know that's not a complete answer, but you know, you can follow up with me and I'll try to elaborate more. Do you also have presentation to upgrade from E811 to 9.0? Not specifically 8.11 to 9.0, but migrating to 9.0 from various releases, you know, past releases. Some of the information would not be applicable because, you know, if we kind of lump in XE and ERP8 and 8.10 in the same conversation, and there's certain things that were in those releases that wouldn't have been in 8.11. But certainly there's a lot of information that talks about 8.11 to 9.0 and what is new in 9.0. And we have a whole webinar on the technology and, you know, functionality in 9.0, and we have a whole other webinar on just upgrading to 9.0 in general from a previous release of EnterpriseOne. Actually, upgrading from 8.11 and 8.12 to 9.0 is fairly simple, and 8.11 customers typically are much happier with a 9.0 migration simply because there's a lot more. There's actually less complexity when you go from 8.11 to 9.0 than there is from, say, 8.12 to 9.0, and that's because you get rid of what they called the E-generator, and that is no longer something that you need in a 9.0. But I can definitely follow up with you. Feel free to send me an email or give me a phone call, and I can get into some of the specifics behind 8.11 to 9.0. So I don't see any other questions. If anybody thinks of any questions after the fact and they just want to email me or give me a phone call, my contact information is on screen. Feel free to contact me really just about any time, and I'll try to give you as much information as I have. If anybody, you know, wants to get a copy of the webinar itself, just shoot me an email and I'll send it to you. We may do a follow-up just to kind of get your opinion of the webinar and, you know, kind of get your criticisms and critiques. And trust me, I listen to all of them and try to incorporate suggestions into future webinars, because the idea is to give you guys information that you want, not just lecture you. So hopefully, if you do get a follow-up, you provide some information in that regard. If you'd like to attend any of our future webinars, please let me know. You probably are already on the list just by signing up for this webinar. You know, if it's a webinar that looks interesting to you, sign up. If it's not, you know, feel free to delete. But thanks again for everyone joining the webinar today. I appreciate your time. I know it's very valuable. We look forward to having you on future webinars. Thanks again, and have a great day.